I decided to take a break from everything for a while. Life in the city had started to feel like it was closing in on me. Work, noise, bills, screens, it was all too much. I thought if I could just be alone for a few days, far away from the noise, I could reset my mind. I started planning a solo hiking trip through the northeastern backcountry, somewhere remote, somewhere deep, and not a tourist trap. After some research, I settled on a section of trail that went through the Allegheny National Forest in Pennsylvania. It wasn't as well known as the big parks out west, but it had deep woods, old trails, creeks, and almost no cell service. That sounded perfect to me. I packed all the basics: a tent, sleeping bag, freeze-dried food, water filter, first aid kit, flashlight, power bank, knife, compass, and a paper map of the area. I also carried a bear canister and some bear spray just in case. I made sure someone back home had a rough idea of my route, though I didn't really expect anything to go wrong. I parked my car at the trailhead just after sunrise on a Monday. It was early fall, cold enough at night to need layers, but warm enough during the day to hike comfortably. The trail started off beautifully. The air smelled like leaves and soil. Everything was quiet except for the occasional bird call or crack of a squirrel darting through the underbrush. I felt good. For the first few hours, it was just peaceful walking, the trail weaving between trees and along small ridges. By afternoon, I was deep into the woods. The trail wasn't marked very well in some spots, but I checked the map often and kept my bearings. That first night, I made camp by a small stream. I cooked, cleaned, and went to bed with no issues. I fell asleep to the sound of water trickling over rocks. It felt like the start of exactly what I needed. The second day was tougher. The terrain got steeper, rockier, and the trail even more overgrown. I didn't see anyone else the whole day. In fact, the trail felt less like a path and more like a suggestion at times. It was hard to tell if I was even still on the official route, but the map still made sense. I was heading in the right direction, even if the trail wasn't obvious. That evening, it rained lightly, just enough to soak the leaves and make everything slippery. I set up camp on a small rise to avoid water pooling. I ate quickly and got into my tent early. The forest felt heavier in the dark. Every little sound outside made me pause. The wind shifting the trees, water dripping from leaves, a twig snapping. I told myself it was just the woods being alive. The third day, things started to go wrong. I woke up feeling stiff and tired. I hadn't slept well. I kept hearing noises during the night, and once I thought I heard something brushing against the outside of my tent. But when I looked, nothing was there. Maybe just branches moving in the wind. I packed up and started moving, but my pace was slower. The rain from the night before made everything damp and harder to walk on. I slipped once going down a slope and scraped my palm pretty badly. It wasn't serious, but it hurt every time I used that hand after that. Around midday, I reached a point where the trail was completely covered by fallen trees. There was no obvious way around. I spent almost 2 hours trying to bushwhack through thick undergrowth to get back on the path. I knew it was risky to wander off trail, but I didn't have much of a choice. According to my compass and map, I was still roughly following the right direction. I kept telling myself it would clear up soon, but it didn't. By mid-afternoon, I realized I was probably lost. The trail was gone. The trees all looked the same. The map didn't help much anymore. It showed ridges and creeks, but everything started to blur together. My GPS app wasn't working. I climbed a hill hoping to get a better view, but all I saw were more trees. No signs of people. No power lines, no cabins, nothing. I set up camp that night on the flattest patch of ground I could find. I tried not to panic. I still had food and water. I had a compass. If I kept heading west, I would eventually hit a road or a town. It might take a day or two, but I wasn't in danger, not yet. That night was worse, much worse. Couldn't sleep. I kept hearing things again. Not just random forest sounds, but crunching. Footsteps? Maybe a deer or a bear, but they didn't wander off. They stayed nearby. Sometimes it sounded like they were circling my tent. I held the bear spray in my hand the entire night, my heart pounding every time a branch snapped. I didn't see anything when I looked, just trees. My flashlight barely lit more than a few feet ahead. I felt like I was being watched. I was too scared to unzip the tent for long. By the time the sun rose, I was exhausted and my nerves were shot. I packed up in a hurry and started walking west, or what I believed was west. I stopped checking the map. It wasn't helping anymore. I just followed my compass. That fourth day was miserable. My legs ached. My back was sore from sleeping on rocks and roots. My water filter had slowed to a trickle and it took almost an hour to fill a bottle. The silence around me didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt heavy, like something was waiting. I kept thinking I was hearing footsteps behind me. When I stopped, they stopped. I told myself I was being paranoid, but I kept looking over my shoulder. At one point, I saw something through the trees. A shape, person maybe. I stared at it for a full minute, frozen. But it didn't move. When I took a step forward, it was gone. Probably just a stump. Or maybe I imagined it. I didn't know anymore. I hadn't seen another human being in days. I camped that night under an overhang of rocks. It was the only shelter I could find. I tried to build a small fire, but everything was too damp. I barely got a flame going, just enough to warm my hands before it died out. I didn't eat much. My stomach was in knots. Every tiny sound outside made me freeze. I thought I heard something breathing outside the rocks. I didn't sleep at all. On the fifth day, I ran out of food. I had one energy bar left, and I ate it by mid-morning. My legs felt like they weighed 100 pounds each. I kept walking. I slipped in mud, fell, tore my pants on a branch and bruised my shin. I kept going. Then I heard something, a distant engine, maybe a plane. Maybe a car. I couldn't tell which direction it was coming from, but it gave me hope. I pushed myself toward where it sounded loudest, stumbling, climbing over down trees, getting scratched up by thorns. I was bleeding from my arms, but I didn't care. By late afternoon, I saw a trail marker, a real one, faded but there. I followed it. My legs burned. My hands were shaking. I followed it for hours. Then I saw a small structure. It looked like a shed or maybe a ranger's outpost. I ran toward it. My body didn't want to move anymore, but I forced it. I got closer. It was locked. No one was there, but there was a dirt road leading away from it. I followed that road. And finally, just before sunset, I saw a car, then a second one, parked at a small pull-off lot. I staggered into the open. I must have looked like a wild animal. Dirty, bloody, limping, pale. But I didn't care. That's where a couple found me. They helped me. They gave me food, water, called for help. I was taken to a clinic where they cleaned my wounds and treated my dehydration. I had lost over 10 pounds in 5 days. I was lucky. If I had kept going the wrong direction, I would have ended up deeper into the forest. The trail I found was an old fire road not even marked on my map. No one knew I had ended up that far off course. I never went hiking alone again after that. I still think about those nights. I still think about the footsteps I heard outside my tent, the shape in the trees, the strange circling sounds. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was just wildlife. Maybe it was my brain playing tricks on me. But whatever it was, it made me feel something I'd never felt before out in nature, that I was not the one in control. And that something out there might have known it too. I had planned the hike for months. I didn't do things on impulse anymore, not after how reckless I used to be in my 20s. Now, at 37, I planned everything. I studied maps. I downloaded offline trail routes. I packed carefully, more than I needed. I made sure I had an external power bank, extra food, extra water, and all my gear in good shape. I picked a route in northern Idaho, near the Montana border. It wasn't a touristy trail. It was remote. No campgrounds. No cell service. The trail was called Sawtooth Hollow Ridge, and there were barely any reviews about it online. I think that's what made it feel special. I had always liked the idea of solitude, like I was the only person on Earth for a little while. The weather forecast said cool days and colder nights. No storms. I had 5 days off work. I planned to hike in and out in 3. Day 1 in. Day 2 camped deeper in the wild. Day 3 out. seemed simple. I parked my truck at the gravel pullout around 6:45 in the morning. It was cold and crisp outside, and the sky was wide open without a cloud. The air smelled like pine and dry leaves. There were no other cars, just the sound of the wind moving in the trees and my boots on the gravel. It was perfect. I locked the truck, slung my pack over my shoulder, and started walking into the woods. The trail started out as a narrow dirt path, edged with moss and old tree roots. I followed the route as it slowly started gaining elevation. I walked for hours that morning, maybe 6. I wasn't in a rush. I took breaks every hour or so, drank water, ate nuts, took deep breaths. The quiet felt unreal. I didn't hear another voice, not one plane overhead, just birds, wind, and the occasional sound of a squirrel rustling somewhere in the branches. By mid-afternoon, I reached a wide flat area between 2 slopes. I set up camp near a stream that I could barely hear unless I stood near it. There was a perfect flat spot surrounded by trees, just hidden enough that I felt tucked away. I pitched the tent, boiled water for food, and spent the last hour of daylight writing in a small notebook and reading the topo map. The map showed the ridge line extending out into 2 fingers, like a forked tongue. I planned to hike out to the right fork and camp the second night with a view of the valley. That would be my halfway point. That night was cold but peaceful. I fell asleep to the sound of light wind brushing the nylon of my tent. Everything still felt perfect. Day 2. I woke up early, made coffee, and broke camp. My body ached a little, but that was normal. I tightened my boots and hiked uphill toward the ridge fork. The terrain was rougher than before. Less obvious paths, more climbing, more ducking under dead trees. A few times I had to stop and check the offline map on my phone. I knew the route wasn't maintained anymore. I liked that about it. It made me feel like I was walking through something forgotten. Around noon, I was climbing a steep incline full of loose rocks and wet mud. I slipped twice. Nothing major, but enough to shake me. I was sweating hard, and my thighs were burning. I told myself I'd find a spot to rest once I reached the top. When I crested the ridge, I stopped. The view opened up and stretched forever. I could see the dark blue shadow of the Bitterroot range far in the distance. Below, the forest went on endlessly. Felt like I was standing on the edge of the world. I sat there for nearly an hour, just breathing and chewing jerky. I was starting to feel like I'd pushed a little too hard, but I didn't want to turn back. I was already close to the fork in the ridge. I wanted to reach it before sunset. I packed up and kept going. Around 3 p.m., I started to get the feeling that something was off. Not panic, not fear, just a sense that things were different. The trail felt less like a trail. At first I thought I had made a wrong turn, but the GPS line on my phone still showed I was close to the ridge fork. Then I found the bones. At first I thought it was a pile of branches. Then I realized it was a ribcage, wide and cracked open, bleached white and half buried in pine needles. It looked like elk. No meat, no fur, just bone. I walked around it slowly, trying to make sense of how old it was. I saw broken antlers nearby. No signs of cutting or bullet holes. No boot prints, just the bones scattered a little. Something had eaten it here. That's when I noticed how quiet everything had become. No birds. No squirrels. Even the wind had died. I told myself it was nothing. Animals die in the wild all the time. Still, I took out the bear spray and clipped it to my belt. I kept going but felt different now. I walked slower. My senses were sharper. Every twig snap made me stop. An hour later, I reached the fork. There was a small clearing with a good view of the valley, just like I'd hoped. I set up camp again, moving slower now. I boiled water, made dinner, then crawled into my sleeping bag just as the sun dropped behind the trees. That night was not peaceful. I woke up 3 times to the sound of something moving near the tent. At first it was slow steps, like something walking around in the leaves. I thought maybe it was a deer or even a bear. I stayed still, holding my breath, listening to the soft crunching of the forest floor. The second time I woke, it was completely quiet. I couldn't tell if I dreamed it. The third time, something brushed against the side of my tent. It wasn't hard, just a soft push like a hand sliding down the nylon wall. I froze. I didn't breathe. I didn't unzip anything. I didn't even reach for the knife or spray. I just stayed still. After what felt like a full minute, I didn't hear anything else. I don't know how I fell back asleep. Maybe my body just shut down from exhaustion or fear. But when I woke up again, the sun was up and the forest was alive with birdsong. Day 3. I packed quickly. I didn't make breakfast. I didn't want coffee. I just wanted to get off the ridge. I told myself again that it was probably just an animal. A curious raccoon. A deer. Even if it was a bear, they didn't normally mess with tents. I just needed to stay calm. I chose a different route back. One that looped around the base of the ridge instead of retracing my steps. It was supposed to connect with the trailhead from the south, maybe 6 miles out. That was a mistake. The trail started well enough, still faint but passable. I followed it downhill, deeper into a narrow valley. The trees grew tighter here, more shadows, less light. By noon, I realized the trail had vanished completely. I checked my map. The GPS line showed me off the trail. I tried backtracking, but the terrain looked different in every direction. High needles, moss, rocks, no clear path. Every few minutes I stopped and turned in a circle, trying to find anything familiar. Nothing looked right. I was lost. I didn't panic at first. I had the map, the compass. My phone still had battery. I could make it work. I kept heading south, hoping to reconnect with the main trail. The hours dragged on. The terrain got worse, steeper, thicker brush. My shins were bleeding from scraping against sharp branches. I fell once on a wet log and slammed my hip hard enough to see stars. By the time the sun started to lower, I still hadn't found anything close to a trail. I stopped walking and stood still. That's when I noticed I hadn't heard a single animal in over an hour. No birds, no bugs, nothing. Then I heard the noise. It wasn't loud. It was faint, a high clicking sound, repeated, irregular, like something tapping rocks together. I stood still, holding my breath. It stopped, then started again somewhere behind me. I turned slowly, scanning the trees. Nothing, just shadows and silence. I started walking faster. Every few minutes I heard it again. The same clicking, sometimes to the left, sometimes behind me, always distant, but close enough to keep me on edge. I tried to convince myself it was woodpeckers, or branches tapping in the wind, but there was no wind, and the noise wasn't random. It had a pattern, followed me. I hiked until it was almost dark. I had to stop. I found a small clearing and pitched the tent, hands shaking. I didn't eat. I didn't drink. I just crawled in and zipped it shut. That night, I didn't sleep. Every few minutes, I heard the tapping, then silence, then the soft crunch of leaves, then silence again. At one point, I swore I saw a shape outside the tent, just a silhouette, wide shoulders, still, watching. But when I blinked, it was gone. Day 4, I left the tent behind. I just packed water, food, the knife, the bear spray, and my map. I bushwhacked due south, following the sun. I knew if I kept going straight, I'd eventually hit a road, a river, anything. My legs burned. My throat was dry. My head pounded. That's when I found the second carcass. It was a deer this time, fresh. The skin was gone. The meat was gone. Just the head and spine, clean, laid neatly on a bed. I had been planning a solo hiking trip for months. I wanted to go somewhere remote, far from cities and crowds, just to clear my head and get away from everything. I had been dealing with a lot: work stress, a rough breakup, the kind of personal stuff that piles up and leaves you feeling like you're sinking slowly every day. Hiking always helped me feel grounded. Out there, things are simple. Just your body, your mind, and the trail. I chose a loop trail deep in the Bitterroot Mountains in Montana. It wasn't a very popular route. I'd read about it on a few old hiking forums. Some people talked about how beautiful it was. Others mentioned how challenging the terrain could be, especially near the ridgelines. It was supposed to be a 4-day loop, a little over 30 miles total, but I packed extra supplies just in case. I had my tent, my sleeping bag, a small stove, freeze-dried meals, water filter, extra batteries, a paper map, compass, GPS watch, satellite messenger, bear spray, a knife, and all the basics. I parked my car at the trailhead early in the morning. It was a rough dirt road getting there. Took about an hour of slow driving after the last paved section ended. No other cars were there, which didn't surprise me. The trail didn't see much foot traffic, and it was late September, cooler weather, shorter days. I signed in at the trail registry, locked my car, and started my hike. The first day was smooth. The trail weaved through dense forest, mostly lodgepole pine and fir. Sunlight came down in patches between the trees, and the smell of pine needles filled the air. I followed the path for miles, stopping once to refill water at a creek. I saw deer tracks in the mud and once heard the distinct snapping of a branch deeper in the woods. Maybe a bear or an elk, but it was too far to see anything. That night, I camped near a wide bend in a stream, far enough from the water to be safe, but close enough to hear it. I cooked, cleaned up, hung my food bag properly, and settled into the tent. The night was uneventful, cold but quiet. The second day took me through a series of switchbacks up toward the ridge. This part was more difficult. Loose rocks, narrow trails, the occasional fallen tree to climb over. As I got higher, the trees thinned, and the air felt different, cooler, sharper. I reached a flat section on a high ridge by early evening. The sun was starting to dip behind the peaks, but I had enough daylight to set up camp on a small plateau. From there, I had a clear view of the valley below. It was quiet. No towns, no roads, just endless layers of forested hills and distant peaks. That night, the wind picked up. My tent flapped now and then, and the temperature dropped enough that I had to wear every layer I brought. I lay awake for a while listening to the wind. At some point, I thought I heard something moving outside, maybe footsteps, but I reminded myself animals sound heavier than they are, especially at night. I didn't hear anything else after that and finally drifted off to sleep. On the third day, I planned to descend into the next valley, loop around the far end, and reconnect with the lower part of the trail. It started fine. The descent was steep but manageable. I had to use my poles more, testing each step to avoid sliding on gravel or stepping on something unstable. The trees were back again, tall and packed close together. It got darker fast once I was under the canopy again. About 5 or 6 miles into the day's hike, I came to a fork in the trail that wasn't marked on my map. One path seemed more traveled, the other less so, but not completely overgrown. I checked my compass and GPS and figured the less traveled path was a shortcut that would reconnect with the loop trail a couple miles ahead. I had read that some hikers used it, but it wasn't officially part of the mapped route. I decided to take it. At first, it was fine, narrower, but easy to follow. Then it started to slope downward more steeply. I noticed that the soil was loose and there were more rocks than usual. It felt less like a trail and more like a dried-up stream bed. I slowed down, checking my footing carefully. I wasn't too worried yet. I kept checking my compass and the GPS. Everything looked okay, even though the GPS signal was starting to weaken in the thick woods. Then the trail suddenly dipped into a sharp ravine. The ground turned into a mess of wet leaves, slick rocks, and steep walls on both sides. I slipped once and slid a few feet down before catching myself with a branch. I stood up, brushed off the dirt, and kept going. I didn't want to climb back up that slope unless I absolutely had to. I figured I'd go forward and reconnect with the main trail soon. About half an hour later, the trail vanished, just stopped. It didn't fade slowly, it just ended. 1 minute I was stepping carefully down a narrow path, and the next I was standing in thick underbrush with no sign of any trail ahead. I checked my GPS again. Nothing, just static. The satellite messenger wasn't giving me a signal either. I turned around and started heading back, but after 10 minutes I couldn't find the trail I had just come down. Everything looked the same trees, same brush, same slopes. I walked back and forth for another hour, trying to retrace my steps. Nothing worked. I started to panic a little. I told myself to stay calm. I had a map, I had a compass. I could get out. I sat down, drank water, looked at the map, and tried to figure out where I might be. I guessed I was somewhere near the southern bend of the loop, maybe slightly east. If I kept heading west, I should eventually hit the main trail again. I marked a direction on my compass and started walking, checking it every few minutes. But the terrain kept shifting. Steep slopes, fallen trees, boulders, thick brush that slowed me down. It was exhausting. I didn't stop for a proper lunch. I just kept walking. Eventually, I found a small clearing and set up camp. I didn't eat much that night, just a few protein bars and a sip of water. I was too tired to cook. That night, I heard movement again. Something was walking nearby, slow, heavy, crunching leaves. I held my bear spray close and waited. I didn't sleep much. By the next morning, I had been off trail for almost a full day. I started walking again, this time following a narrow stream I found, thinking it might lead to a larger water source or even intersect with a trail. I followed it for hours, but the terrain got worse. At one point, I had to climb over a series of jagged rocks, and I slipped again. This time it was bad. I fell backward, hit my shoulder on a rock, and rolled into the stream. The cold water soaked me instantly. I got up slowly, checked myself. My arm was bruised and stiff, but not broken. My pack was soaked. Some of my gear had floated downstream, including one of my water bottles. I limped back to the bank and sat down. I wanted to scream. That night, I camped on a damp patch of ground with no shelter from the wind. I was cold, hungry, and soaked to the bone. I used my emergency blanket inside the sleeping bag to try and stay warm. I don't think I slept more than 20 minutes at a time. The fourth day, I was weaker. My food was running low. I only had a couple meals left, and I was down to a single bottle of water. I refilled from the stream, boiled it, but it tasted like mud. I kept walking, but I was slower now. My legs ached, and my shoulder throbbed with every step. The thought of rescue crossed my mind more than once. I tried the satellite messenger again, but it still couldn't find a signal. I climbed a small hill, thinking maybe elevation would help. Still nothing. That night, I didn't set up the tent. I didn't have the energy. I just lay inside the sleeping bag under a pine tree and waited for daylight. I heard movement again, this time closer, something circling me. Not fast, just deliberate. I didn't move. I kept the bear spray clutched in my fist until sunrise. On the fifth day, I saw something that gave me hope. Footprint. Not mine. A real hiking boot print. Fresh, maybe a day old. I followed the direction it pointed, stumbling over roots and brush, eyes scanning for more. I found another print, and then another, then nothing, but I kept going in that direction. By mid-afternoon, I found a trail, a real one. Wide, packed dirt, boot prints, broken branches. I collapsed onto the ground and cried. It was the lower part of the loop trail, finally. I checked my map. I was almost 6 miles from the trailhead. I hiked the rest of the way slowly, taking breaks, drinking what was left of my water. I reached the parking lot just as the sun was setting. My car was still there, no other vehicles. I unlocked it, got inside, and just sat there. Everything hurt. My bak, my legs, my arm. I turned the ignition. The engine started. I drove straight to the nearest town, nearly 2 hours away on winding roads. I checked into a motel and slept for almost 12 hours. The next day, I went to a clinic. Nothing was broken, just deep bruising and mild dehydration. I was lucky. The truth is, I messed up. I went off trail without knowing exactly where it would lead. I relied too much on a GPS that failed when I needed it most. I thought I was prepared for anything, but I wasn't. I underestimated the terrain, the weather, the exhaustion, and I had been planning a solo hiking trip for months. I was going to take a week off from work and go out into the wilderness, away from phone signals, traffic, and all the small, useless things that fill my mind every day. I wanted complete isolation. No distractions. Just trees, sky, and the sound of my boots on dirt. I picked a lesser-known ridge trail in the northern part of the state, one that wasn't too far from the border but still pretty remote. It was called Black Hollow Ridge. The name didn't mean anything to me. It just sounded like any other trail. It was listed in a few old hiking blogs, but it wasn't on most official maps anymore. That made it perfect. I didn't want to run into other people. I didn't want to hear voices or see tents. I spent the week before the trip getting everything ready. I packed light but smart. Tent, sleeping bag, food for 6 days, water purifier, extra socks, trail mix, protein bars, fire starter, flashlight, headlamp, batteries, knife, and a topographic map I printed from a forum thread. I also had my GPS watch, fully charged. I tested all my gear twice before leaving. Everything worked fine. I kept telling myself it would be good, that I was ready. I drove out early one morning before sunrise. The trailhead was in a faded clearing near an old Forestry Service road, barely wide enough for my truck to squeeze through. There was no sign, just a wooden post with a piece of orange ribbon tied around it. The blog post said that was the marker. I double-checked the coordinates. It matched. I parked the truck, left a note on the dash with my name and route plan just in case, and locked up. The air was cold, even in June. I remember how still it felt. No wind, no sounds, just the creaking of trees and a couple birds. I took a deep breath and started the trail. The first day was everything I wanted. Quiet, calm, deep woods, pines that went up forever. The trail itself was rough, more like a deer path than a proper trail, but I followed it easily. There were cairns, stacked rocks, along some parts to help guide the way. I felt great. I didn't see a single person, just squirrels and maybe one elk in the distance. I hiked for about 6 hours that day, slow and steady, and found a flat spot off the trail where I pitched my tent. I made a small fire, boiled some water for dinner, and fell asleep early. The second day, I kept going up the ridge. The path became harder to follow, but I still had my compass and GPS watch. I wasn't too worried. I knew how to read terrain. I grew up doing this. There was a section where the trail split in two. One side dipped into a narrow gully. The other stayed higher along a ledge. My gut told me to stay high, so I did. That was the first mistake. The high trail curved around the slope and started to climb. It was narrow and uneven, with some parts crumbling under my feet. I had to crouch in places, using my hands to steady myself. I kept thinking it would reconnect with the lower trail eventually, but it didn't. After another hour, the path just stopped. Completely. There was a rock slide up ahead, maybe years old. It had taken out a chunk of the trail. I looked back and thought about turning around, but something made me keep going. That was the second mistake. I climbed around the slide, hugging the slope, using roots and rocks to pull myself over. I moved slow and careful. One bad step and I would tumble 50 feet into the trees. But I made it. I found what looked like a clearing beyond the slide. I thought I could cut across and meet up with the trail again. But when I got to the clearing, there was no trail, just trees and rocks and uneven forest floor. I checked my GPS. The screen was blank. Nothing. It was still on, but it wasn't showing location. I tapped it, reset it. Still nothing. I pulled out my compass and tried to orient myself, but the needle spun in slow circles and never settled. I stood there for a long time. I didn't want to admit I was lost, but I was completely turned around. I tried going back the way I came, but after 20 minutes, everything looked the same. No trail, no markers. I told myself to stay calm. I wasn't out of food. I had water. I just needed to move downhill and find the gully trail again. I walked for hours. I mean that literally. Hours. I didn't stop for lunch. I didn't even stop to pee. I just kept walking, scanning the trees, looking for anything that looked like a trail. But the forest was thick and the ridge was steep. Every direction started to look the same. I knew the sun was going west, so I kept it on my left side and kept moving. By the time I stopped, the light was fading. My legs were aching, and my shirt was soaked through with sweat. I set up camp quickly, using a patch of mossy ground that seemed flat enough. I didn't bother with a fire. I wasn't in the mood. I chewed half a protein bar, drank water, and lay in the tent staring at the ceiling. That night I heard sounds. Not animals, not footsteps, just faint crunches. Leaves and twigs once or twice. Not often. I told myself it was deer, or maybe branches falling, but it happened again the next night, and the night after. The third day, I tried a different direction. I moved east, thinking I would hit a road or a river. I remembered the forum post said there was a creek system on the east side of the ridge. If I could find that, I could follow it down. But the ground was worse. The slope was broken up by gullies and dry ravines. Some parts were too steep to descend, so I had to backtrack and go around. I tore my pants on a branch. My left hand got scraped on a rock. The trees were so close together in places I had to push through them sideways. That afternoon, I found something. It was an old campsite, very old, not recent. I saw a rusted pan half buried under leaves, a piece of blue tarp faded and shredded. There was a crushed aluminum can near a log. I thought it might mean I was near a trail, but I searched the area for an hour and didn't find anything else. No footprints, no path. That night, the sounds came back. I was deep in my sleeping bag, listening hard. I didn't move. The sounds weren't close, but they were there. Crunch, pause, crunch, then silence for a long time, then again. I stayed still until morning. The fourth day, I started to feel the exhaustion. My legs were shaking when I climbed. My back hurt from the pack. I had been rationing food, but I was still getting weaker. I hadn't seen a single person. Not a tent, not a fire ring, not a rapper. Nothing. Around midday, I slipped. It wasn't a bad fall. I was climbing a slope full of loose dirt, and my boot gave out. I slid maybe 10 feet and scraped my thigh hard on a rock. It bled, but not deep. I patched it with gauze, but the pain slowed me down. Every step burned after that. Then, near sundown, I heard the sounds again, but this time they were closer. I froze and waited. The crunching was behind me, somewhere above. Not fast, not loud, just steady. I crouched and held my breath. Then it stopped. I didn't sleep that night. I sat up in the tent, headlamp off, knife in my hand, listening. The forest was quiet, but the kind of quiet that presses in on you, the kind that makes your ears ring. I heard the crunches again, faint, farther off, and I smelled something, not strong but strange, like sweat mixed with dirt and something metallic. It made me feel sick for a second. By dawn, I had made up my mind. I would drop the pack and move fast. Just go straight downhill until I found water or a road or anything. I left the pack under a log, keeping only my knife, flashlight, 2 bars, and 1 bottle of water in a sling pouch. I walked downhill for what felt like forever. My legs were jelly. My mouth was dry. I kept checking behind me even though I hadn't heard anything since dawn. Then I saw it. Clearing. Real this time. Big and open. And on the other side, power lines. I almost cried. Real, tall wooden poles with thick cables. Civilization. I ran toward them, stumbling, tripping, falling to my knees and getting back up. I followed the line down a gentle slope for maybe another half mile and found the edge of a gravel service road. And then, finally, a truck. It was a state maintenance vehicle parked off the shoulder. No one was inside, but the door was unlocked. I sat on the bumper until someone came. Maybe an hour later, a man in a uniform showed up, probably the driver, surprised to see me. I gave him my name, showed him ID, and told him I'd been lost for 4 days. He didn't ask many questions. He radioed it in, gave me a bottle of cold water, and drove me to a ranger station about an hour away. They asked me if I had seen anyone. I told them no. I asked about the trail. They said it hadn't been maintained in years, technically closed. Rock slides made it unsafe, and the area had no regular patrols. I asked if anyone else had been reported missing out there. The ranger paused and said not recently, but a few years back, a guy had gone out that way and never come. I had planned the trip for over a month. I was tired of being inside all the time, tired of the noise from the city, the traffic, the constant alerts on my phone, the voices, the pressure, everything. I needed quiet. I needed something different. I had done smaller hikes before, day trips and weekend walks with a pack and a buddy, but this one was supposed to be different. A solo 5-day backcountry hike, deep in the forest, in a part of the country where there wasn't much of anything for miles. No gas stations, no towns, no noise, just wilderness. I'd picked a trail that looped around a stretch of forest in the northern part of the state, full of ridgelines, thick trees, and lakes that were completely untouched. I wanted to disappear into the trees for a while and just be there, alone and silent. The morning I left, everything felt right. I packed methodically: tent, sleeping bag, GPS, topographical map, water filtration, extra batteries, weatherproof clothing, a couple freeze-dried meals per day, bear spray, first aid kit, and a knife I kept clipped to my belt. I brought my hiking poles, too. I liked the rhythm they gave to the walk. I told my brother I'd be gone for 5 days and gave him my exact route, down to the mile markers. I planned to check in with a GPS ping on the 3rd day just to let him know I was fine. He wasn't a hiker. He said he thought I was insane for going alone. Maybe he was right. The drive up was quiet. I left before sunrise and didn't see another car for miles as the trees swallowed the road. By late morning, I parked at a small trailhead. Nothing more than a gravel patch and a faded wooden sign that marked the trail's name and length. I didn't see any other vehicles parked there. I was alone from the start, which was what I wanted. The first day was calm and easy. I started my hike at around 11 a.m., pacing myself. The trail weaved through tall pine and cedar trees. The ground was soft with needles, and the wind was steady and cool. I walked slowly, stopping often to check my bearings, snack, and drink water. I had no reason to rush. I didn't even bring headphones. I wanted to hear the wind in the trees and the birds overhead. The only sounds were the ones I made: boots pressing into soft dirt, the occasional snap of a branch underfoot, my breath, the swish of my pack straps. By 6 p.m., I reached a clearing beside a long, narrow lake. The sun was still up, but I was getting tired. The lake was almost perfectly still. I filled my water bag, filtered enough for dinner and the next day, and set up my tent just inside the tree line. I ate a bag of freeze-dried chili, listened to the birds get quieter, and sat on a rock watching the lake turn gold, then dark. It was the kind of peace I came out there for. No voices, no cars, no pressure. Just trees and water and sky. I slept okay that first night. It was cold, but I had layers. I woke up once or twice from animal noises, a distant owl or a few rustlings in the bushes near my tent, but that was normal. Out there, if you're lucky, it's just raccoons or deer or squirrels. And I had bear spray within reach inside the tent, just in case. The second day, I started early. The trail climbed uphill for hours, switchbacks leading into denser forest. I didn't see any people, not even a single footprint in the mud. Felt like no one had come through there for days. I liked that until I didn't. Somewhere after midday, I stopped for lunch near a dry creek bed and noticed something weird. A fresh boot print in the mud, but it wasn't mine. It looked about the same size, but it was deeper in the heel and pointed downhill, which meant whoever made it was going the opposite direction I was. I looked around for more, and there were a few more faint prints near a patch of moss. Nothing alarming, really. Could have been from the day before. The ground was soft and held prints longer up there. I kept moving. That night, I camped near a grove of trees, off the trail about 20 yards, not far from another small lake. The air was colder. I filtered water, ate quickly, and set up my tent under a thick tree cover. The place felt darker than the last campsite, like the trees were pushing in closer. I fell asleep after sunset, but woke up maybe an hour later, heart pounding. I didn't know why. I didn't hear anything. I just felt watched. I lay there in the dark for a long time, staring at the ceiling of the tent, ears wide open. I didn't even move, but I didn't hear anything. No footsteps, no twigs breaking, no animal sounds. After a while, I must have drifted off. In the morning, something small was off. Nothing was stolen or missing, but one of the zipper flaps on the tent door was twisted in a way I never left it. It was unzipped just a few inches at the bottom. Maybe I hadn't closed it all the way. Maybe wind did it, but I was sure I'd zipped it shut from the inside before sleeping. I always did. I told myself I was being paranoid. I shook it off, packed up, and kept going. The trail narrowed on day 3, winding into a steeper section of forest with sharp ridges and tall grass. The forest floor got harder to see in some places. My poles helped me keep balance. Midway through the day, I crossed a tiny wooden bridge over a stream and found something that stopped me cold. A dead rabbit, cleanly gutted, left in the middle of the trail. No blood, no flies, no scavenging animals around. Just the body perfectly placed. It didn't look like a predator kill. It looked too clean. I just stood there for a long time, staring at it. Then I stepped around it and kept going. About 3 hours later, I reached the high point of the trail, a flat ridge overlooking a deep forested valley. I stopped there for lunch. The wind was strong up there, and the sky looked darker. I took out my GPS and sent the check-in ping to my brother. It went through. I was on schedule. I rested for an hour, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. As I descended into the valley, I started checking behind me more often. Every time I stopped, the forest was dead silent, too quiet. I didn't hear birds anymore. I didn't hear anything but the wind. The air felt thick. I started walking faster. By the time I picked my campsite for that night, I was exhausted but on edge. I moved about 30 yards off trail, down a small slope near a patch of ferns. The trees were tall and close together, and it felt safe, hidden. I ate quickly, didn't even bother boiling water for coffee. I just wanted to rest, but I couldn't sleep. Every creak outside the tent made me freeze. Around midnight, I heard it, a stick cracking, not like a falling branch, but something stepping on it. Then nothing. Then another crack closer. I held my breath and grabbed my knife. No footsteps, no breathing, just quiet. I didn't move the rest of the night. I just laid there, knife in hand, listening to my heart beat against the nylon walls. When the sky started to lighten, I finally unzipped the door and crawled out. Everything looked normal. No footprints, no broken branches, no signs of anyone. But I knew someone had been out there. I could feel it. That morning, I found something else that shook me. A small rock, about the size of my fist, had been placed on top of my backpack. Not wedged or thrown, placed right in the center of the top pocket. That rock hadn't been there before. I packed fast and didn't even eat. I just wanted to get out of that valley. The fourth day was the worst. I hiked fast and hard, ignoring my planned pace. I just wanted to get closer to the loop's end. I skipped lunch. Every time I looked behind me, I expected to see someone, but there was nothing. Still, the sense of being followed got stronger with each hour. The silence in the forest was total now. No birds, not even bugs. I found more signs, too. Another rabbit, this one hanging from a low branch with a piece of string. A human handprint smeared into the dirt by the trail, no glove. And deep, fresh boot prints. The same kind I saw on day 2. Someone was behind me, or maybe ahead. I didn't know anymore. Late in the day, I slipped on a wet rock and twisted my ankle. Not badly, but enough to limp. That was when the fear really hit. I couldn't run if I had to. I was slower now, easier to follow, easier to catch. I camped early, just off trail in a small hollow behind a mossy boulder. I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. I didn't even set up the tent. I just curled up in my sleeping bag against the rock, knife and bear spray in hand, and waited. Just after 2 a.m., I heard footsteps. Real ones. Slow, heavy, crunching dry leaves. They stopped about 20 feet away. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't move. I held my breath and listened. Then I heard the sound of someone sitting down. Just sitting. Not walking, not approaching. Just sitting and breathing. They stayed there for hours. I didn't sleep at all. When the sky turned gray, I finally peeked over the edge of the boulder. No one was there, but there was a small stick figure, made of twigs and string, standing upright in the dirt where the person had sat. I limped fast the next morning. I planned that hiking trip for over a month. I wanted to go somewhere far away from people, from noise, from phones, and from everything that had been cluttering my head for the last few years. I was tired. Not just tired from work or tired from city life, but tired deep inside. The kind of tiredness that sleep doesn't fix. I'd been working at a tech support job for nearly 6 years. I spent my days listening to strangers yell over issues I didn't cause, solving problems that weren't mine, and pretending I didn't care when someone on the other end swore at me. It added up, slowly, and eventually I realized I hadn't taken a real break in over 3 years. So I told myself I was going to disappear for a week. Just me, my backpack, a tent, and the kind of silence only nature could give. I didn't want a popular trail with people every few hundred feet. I wanted something real, raw. I looked through maps, watched some online hiking videos, and finally picked an area in a lesser-known part of a national forest in the western part of the state. It was about a 6-hour drive from where I lived. The region didn't have many marked trails, but the terrain wasn't mountainous or too dangerous. It had some rough valleys, dry riverbeds, and pine-covered ridges. Just what I needed. I parked my car at a ranger station that was barely used. It wasn't staffed, just an old wooden building and a gravel lot. I locked up my car, slung my pack over my shoulders, and started walking northeast, where I'd marked an open valley on my printed topographic map. I had a GPS watch, a compass, and extra batteries. I wasn't stupid. I made sure I could find my way back. I wasn't on a death wish. I just wanted peace. The first day went smoothly. I hiked about 12 miles through dense trees and stopped near a dry stream. I set up my tent on a flat patch near some tall grass, cooked a small meal, and lay down watching the sky get darker. It was quiet in the way I'd been craving. I could hear bugs, some birds, and the occasional creaking of trees, but no voices, no cars, no phones. I slept well that night. The second day, I pushed deeper into the forest, climbing up a small ridge and dropping down into another valley. This one was a bit more rugged, filled with fallen logs and thicker brush. I moved slower but didn't mind. My map showed a wide area of open terrain ahead, with some ridgelines and a long, shallow valley in the shape of a horseshoe. That was my destination. I wanted to set up camp there and stay for at least 2 nights before heading back out. I reached it by late afternoon. The horseshoe-shaped valley was quiet, green, and almost completely surrounded by pine-covered slopes. It felt untouched. The ground was soft and flat in most places, and the air smelled clean, full of pine needles and dry earth. I found a good clearing on the east end of the valley, near a tall rock face with scattered boulders. It was perfect. I set up camp again, boiled some water from a nearby creek using purification tablets, and ate while sitting on one of the rocks. That evening, as the sun dropped, I saw something odd. It wasn't big, just a flash of movement on the far side of the valley, about 200 yards away, near a clump of trees. I didn't see what it was, only the movement. Could have been a deer or even a large bird. I didn't think much of it. The next day, I stayed put. I went on short walks around the area, checked the rocks, followed the creek a bit. I saw no signs of people, no wrappers, no boot prints, no broken branches from human traffic. It was exactly the kind of isolation I'd wanted. I took a nap in the afternoon, laying on my back near my tent, watching the clouds drift. Later that evening, while walking toward the west side of the valley, I noticed something else strange. I found a boot print, a single one. It was deep and clear in the soft dirt, near the edge of a low slope. I didn't remember stepping there before. The print didn't match my own boots. It was larger, wider, and angled in a direction I hadn't come from. It looked fresh, probably made within a day. That got my attention. I stood there for a while, staring at the print, looking around. Nothing. No sound. I scanned the slope, the trees, the hill above. Still nothing. I told myself it could have been old. The dirt might have held the shape longer than normal. Maybe a hiker passed through days ago. Still, something felt off. That evening, I kept my headlamp on longer than usual. I checked my surroundings twice before going to sleep, and I kept the zipper of my tent half open so I could peek out easily. The night was quiet, but the next morning, I saw something that truly made my stomach drop. A small pile of rocks, no taller than my knee, had been stacked right outside my tent, not 5 feet away. They hadn't been there the night before. I was sure of it. The stones were smooth, some round, some flat, arranged carefully, not thrown or scattered. The kind of stack that didn't just happen by accident. Someone made it. I froze. Every part of me tensed up. My skin went cold. I looked around in all directions. There were no prints, no noise, no sign of anyone nearby. But someone had been there, close enough to reach my tent, close enough to arrange rocks just outside while I slept. I didn't touch the pile. I didn't want to disturb anything. I just packed up. I didn't eat, didn't take photos, didn't even stretch. I shoved everything into my pack and started walking back the way I came. I moved fast, but within a few hours, I realized I had made a mistake. The terrain didn't look right. I kept checking my map, double-checking the direction of the sun using my compass. I wasn't heading northeast anymore. Somehow I was drifting south without noticing. I tried to adjust, circling back, but every ridge started to look the same. Trees blended into each other. I reached a dry creek I thought I recognized, but then it turned in the wrong direction. By early afternoon, I had to admit I was lost. I didn't panic yet. I had food, water, and tools. I sat down, checked everything, tried to reset my position on the map. But the longer I studied the lines and shapes, the more I realized I had misjudged something earlier. I had likely taken a wrong turn at the edge of the valley and hadn't noticed because the trees were so thick. I tried climbing a small hill to get a better view. From the top, I could see miles of forest.
No Traios, no Marquês, no Smoke, no Distant Roads.
Just endless trees and ridges. I could even see part of the Horseshoe Valley far in the distance, but it was behind me and a little too far to go back to easily. I kept moving east. I walked until sunset. My legs were burning, and my shoulders ached. I set up camp in a random clearing, ate a few protein bars, and tried to calm down. I kept a knife next to me inside the tent that night. The next morning, things got worse. As I stepped out of my tent, the first thing I noticed was a mark on a tree. It wasn't a natural scratch from an animal. It was a symbol, 2 straight lines crossed by a third, like an uneven H. It was carved into the bark. Fresh, clean, about chest high. I walked a few steps and saw another. Same symbol, different tree. Then another. There were no footprints, no paths. Just those symbols, always carved at the same height, facing the same direction. They weren't spaced evenly but seemed to follow a loose curve toward the east, the direction I had planned to hike. I followed them slowly for about half a mile. Then they stopped, just ended at a fallen log. No more marks after that. I turned in a circle, looking for more, but found none. That night, I didn't sleep much. I lay in my tent with the knife in my hand, eyes wide open. I didn't hear anything, but my chest was tight, and my heartbeat never slowed down. The next day, I woke up determined to get out, even if it meant bushwhacking in one direction until I hit a road or fence or something. I used my compass and forced myself east-northeast for the entire day. I drank almost all my water. My legs were starting to cramp from stress and exertion. I had blisters on both feet. And then I found something I still can't explain fully. It was a small wooden structure. Not a cabin, not a shed, more like a crude shelter made from branches and old boards. It was built into the side of a slope, mostly hidden by bushes and trees. I almost missed it. It had no windows, just a narrow door and a sagging roof made from corrugated metal and thick branches. No sign, no path, no tracks around it. I didn't go inside. I don't know why, but I couldn't bring myself to even touch the door. I just stood there, staring at it. My throat felt dry, and my stomach was tight. Something about it felt wrong in a deep, quiet way. The structure looked old, but not abandoned, like someone had built it carefully to not be found. I circled it from a distance and noticed an old plastic water jug behind it, half buried in leaves. I left fast. I didn't stop until I couldn't walk anymore. That night, I barely set up my tent. I just laid the sleeping bag on the ground under some low trees and stayed wrapped up in it. I didn't sleep. The following day, after hiking for nearly 6 hours without any clear path, I heard something, an engine. It was faint at first. I've done a lot of hiking alone. Some of it smart, some of it stupid. What happened that week in late September will always stick with me as a time I pushed a little too far. I made every mistake in the book except bringing no water. That was the only thing I got right. Everything else, route planning, risk management, weather awareness, timing, gear, I messed up. And I paid for it. Not with my life, obviously, or I wouldn't be writing this, but with something close to it. That trip changed how I move through the mountains now. Before, I moved through them like they were a challenge. After, I moved through them like they could kill me, because they can. It started on a Wednesday morning. I'd been itching to get out on a longer solo hike. Not just a one-night thing, something that would push me a bit. Maybe 4 or 5 days. I didn't want to do one of the big national park trails that had lots of people. I wanted remote, wild. I wanted to be alone with the land, without cell signal, without other hikers, without any of the soft stuff that usually makes these trips easy. And I wanted views, real alpine stuff, high ridges, valleys that dropped forever, pine and rock and wind. I settled on an area I'd seen mentioned in some forums. Not a named trail, not a loop that made the rounds on social media, just a cluster of remote logging roads up in a corner of northern Idaho that still felt rough and quiet. There were some old routes used by hunters and backpackers, barely maintained, mostly animal tracks now. One ridge in particular looked like it could give me what I was after. It stretched a long, bony line for about 11 miles. The idea was to bushwhack up a drainage to meet the spine, traverse it over 2 days, and then drop down through an old burned forest and hike out to a gravel road where I'd left my bike stashed behind a downed tree. My car was parked 20 miles east at the head of the drainage. I figured 5 days, 6 max. I carried 5.5 days of food, a tent, stove, bear spray, GPS, topo map, a power bank, and all the usual stuff. My pack was heavy but not miserable. I double-checked the forecast, which called for clear skies and mild temps. I had enough water and a filter. I left a rough plan with a friend, told him if I wasn't back by Tuesday, he should call it in. That was probably the smartest thing I did. The first day was rougher than I expected. The drainage I was supposed to follow was choked with blowdowns, old avalanche debris, and thick brush. It had probably been decades since anyone had gone that way. I had to crawl on all fours under branches, climb over rotting logs slick with moss, and push through head-high alder for hours. I barely made 5 miles that first day, even though I hiked from morning to late evening. My legs were shredded, my forearms bleeding from branches, and I fell 3 times, once hard enough to knock the wind out of me. I camped on a sloped spot above a creek that night, exhausted, soaked in sweat, feet throbbing. I barely ate. The next morning, I woke up feeling worse. My body wasn't used to the bushwhacking, and I hadn't slept well. Something had paced around the tent during the night, probably a deer or maybe a black bear. I'd heard the slow steps crunching in the leaves, stopping, then moving again. My nerves were shot, and I hadn't slept more than 2 hours, but I kept moving. I wasn't about to turn back after just 1 day. It took me until the middle of the second day to finally gain the ridge. The climb was brutal, steep, slick, covered in loose rock and patches of thorny undergrowth. I lost the trail several times and had to backtrack, but I eventually found an old cairn on a saddle that marked the beginning of the ridge proper. From there, the walking improved. The ridge was open and dry, the forest thin, the air crisp. It felt like freedom after the jungle-like lower elevations. I camped that night near a small tarn just off the ridge, tucked behind a rock wall that shielded me from the wind. That was the best night of the trip. The sunset lit the entire valley in gold, and for a moment, I forgot how hard the approach had been. I ate a full meal, changed into dry socks, and even cracked a smile for the first time in 2 days. Day 3 was when things started going wrong again. The ridge looked simple on the map. A clean line, a few bumps in elevation, nothing serious. But the map didn't show the exposure. Parts of the ridge were knife-thin, with sheer drops on both sides. Wind gusts came out of nowhere and nearly knocked me off my feet more than once. I started moving slower, using my hands to steady myself. The trail disappeared completely in some sections. I had to downclimb loose rock and then scramble back up scree slopes, burning energy I hadn't planned for. I rationed food more tightly. At one point, I slid a few feet down a gravel face and cut my palm badly trying to catch myself. The blood wouldn't stop for a long time. I wrapped it in gauze, then duct tape. The pain made gripping my trekking poles difficult. Still, I pushed on. By late afternoon, Clouds were building in the west. That wasn't in the forecast. Thick, dark ones, low and fast-moving. I picked up my pace, looking for a spot to descend early and bail out to the road, but the sides of the ridge were too steep. The trees far below were still green and swaying, but up high, the wind picked up fast. I made camp near a rock overhang that offered some shelter. I couldn't get the tent fully staked down on the rocky ground, so I weighted the corners with stones and hoped it would hold. I barely ate again. I was too cold, too tired. That night, the storm came in. No rain, just wind. Hard, punishing wind. The kind that flaps a tent like it's trying to rip it out of the earth. I barely slept. The whole night I lay there, listening to gusts howl over the ridge, feeling the rocks shift under the tent corners, praying the fabric wouldn't tear. Sometime before dawn, the tent collapsed. One of the poles snapped clean. I crawled out into the cold, dragging the wet, twisted mess into the overhang, wrapping myself in the body of the tent like a blanket. I shivered until sunrise. I should have turned back that morning. I knew that, but I thought I could finish the ridge. I was close to the northern end, maybe 4 or 5 miles. Then it would be downhill all the way to the gravel road and the bike. But my hands were shaking. My food was almost gone. My left knee was acting up from the down climb 2 days earlier, and my GPS battery was almost dead. Still, I pressed on. An hour into that day, I made my worst mistake. I tried to bypass a particularly narrow section of ridge by dropping down the east face to skirt around it. The slope was loose talus and dirt, barely stable. Halfway across, I stepped on a flat-looking rock that slid out from under me. I fell about 20 feet before landing hard on my side, bouncing once, then sliding to a stop wedged between 2 rocks. I couldn't breathe at first. The pain in my ribs was sharp and deep. My pack had taken some of the impact, but not enough. I lay there for maybe half an hour, not moving, afraid to find out what was broken. Eventually, I tried to sit up. The pain in my chest exploded. Not broken, I told myself, just badly bruised. But it was hard to tell. I managed to pull myself upright and check my legs. They worked. No obvious fractures. My left arm was useless now. The wrist had swollen badly, maybe sprained. I couldn't grip with that hand anymore. The rest of the day, I moved like a crawling animal. Slow, hunched, deliberate. I lost the ridge entirely. Spent hours circling steep faces looking for a way up. I was off route, exhausted, in pain, and alone. I finally gave up and made camp early under a cluster of twisted trees. That night it rained. Cold, steady rain that turned the ground to mud and soaked everything that wasn't already wet. I curled up in my soaked tent shell, shaking, barely able to eat. My lighter stopped working. I couldn't cook food. My last 2 granola bars I ate raw, chewing slowly, eyes shut. The 5th morning I woke up to fog. I couldn't see 20 feet. Everything was gray. I had no GPS left. The power bank was dead. The paper map was damp and barely readable. I still had a general sense of where north was, so I started moving that way, hoping I'd reconnect with the ridge or find a game trail. I stumbled for hours. Sometimes I screamed just to hear something. Nothing answered. No birds, no wind, just fog and wet trees and pain. Eventually, I started seeing signs of fire, blackened trees, scorched earth. I was in the burn zone from a wildfire that had passed through years ago. That meant I was heading in the right direction. But the ground was worse now. Soft, crumbling ash, weakened roots, sudden drop-offs. I nearly fell into a washout once, caught myself at the last second. Every step was a risk. Sometime in the afternoon, I saw a faint trail, just a thin path of compacted dirt leading downhill. I followed it. I was limping badly now, knee swollen, one hand wrapped in mud-soaked bandages, ribs screaming with every breath. I followed the trail until it turned into a logging road. Rutted, old, barely used, but a road that felt like salvation. I don't know what made me decide to hike that particular trail. Maybe I just wanted to test myself. I'd done a few weekend hikes before, nothing too advanced, usually marked, maintained trails near towns or through state parks. I'd even done a couple of overnighters with friends. But this was different. I had some time off work, and I didn't want to waste it just sitting at home. I wanted something harder, something I could be proud of. So I picked a route through a remote part of a national forest I'd only read about online. It wasn't a famous trail or one of those places that gets posted all over social media. It was rugged, mostly unmaintained, stretching through dense forest and rising gradually over hills and rocky terrain. The few reviews I found said it was beautiful but tough. One guy said he got turned around and had to camp unexpectedly because he lost the trail. Another said he saw no one for 3 days. That should have been a warning sign, but I took it as a challenge. I spent a few days getting ready. I packed my bag carefully: tent, sleeping bag, stove, extra food, bear spray, map, compass, satellite communicator, and a small first aid kit. I was trying to do it responsibly. I told a friend the area I'd be in and said I'd check in once a day with the satellite device. The plan was to hike in for 3 days, camp 2 nights, then turn around and head back the same way. I didn't want to do a full loop because I wasn't familiar with the terrain, and this way felt safer. The morning I started, the sky was overcast, and the air was thick with moisture. It had rained the day before, so everything was damp, and the leaves on the trees hung low with water. The trailhead was marked by an old wooden sign that was barely readable anymore, but it matched the GPS coordinates I had. I checked my pack again, tightened the straps, and stepped into the woods. The trail was narrow from the beginning. Grass and ferns had grown over it in places, and the only way I knew I was on the right path was the occasional blaze on a tree. Faded orange paint, almost invisible now. But it was peaceful. The forest was dense but quiet, except for the occasional bird or the creak of trees shifting in the wind. The farther I went, the less I heard of the outside world. By the second hour, there was no cell signal, no car noise, no planes overhead. Just woods. I made good progress the first day. The elevation gain was steady but not too steep, and I took my time, stopping for water and to take off my pack every couple of hours. I crossed one small stream using a downed log and kept going, marking my location every hour with the satellite communicator. The trees got thicker the deeper I went, and the trail started climbing more sharply by late afternoon. Around 4:30 p.m., I found a relatively flat clearing off the trail and decided to set up camp. There were no fire rings or signs of other people, but the ground was dry, and I had enough space for my tent. I boiled water for dinner, ate slowly, and tried to relax, but I felt a little off. Maybe it was just being alone that far out. Everything seemed too quiet. I didn't hear any crickets or frogs, just wind through the branches and the occasional snap of something in the woods that I kept telling myself was just a squirrel or a branch falling. I checked in on the device, sent my location, and tried to sleep. Took hours. Every little sound made my heart jump. A few times, I sat up and listened hard, thinking I heard something moving, but it always stopped. I eventually drifted off sometime after midnight. The next morning, I packed up and got moving early. The trail got harder. It climbed steeply up a rocky ridge, and the soil was loose from the rain 2 days earlier. I slipped a couple of times, caught myself, and kept going. My legs were already sore, and the humidity made it worse. The trail was harder to follow that day. The blazes disappeared for long stretches, and I had to rely on the GPS and the map. I was sweating through my shirt before noon and running low on water. I found a small spring trickling down a rock wall and filled my bottles with my filter. That's when I noticed something strange. The trail ahead didn't match what I had marked on the map. I checked the GPS and saw that I had veered slightly to the east, but it didn't make sense. I'd followed what I thought was the trail. It even had an old blaze on one tree, but then nothing. I had to make a decision. Either keep going in that direction and try to loop back or double back and find where I went wrong. I decided to keep going. That was my first real mistake. The slope ahead was steeper, and the trees were tighter together. Every step took effort. By the time I reached what I thought was the top of the ridge, I was exhausted and the trail had completely vanished. It was just thick forest now, no blazes, no path, no sign anyone had ever been through here. But I still had GPS, so I told myself I could keep going a little farther and reconnect with the trail on the other side of the ridge. I never found it. The ground on the far side dropped fast. It wasn't a ridge like I thought. It was more like the edge of a deep valley or ravine, and the forest got even denser. My GPS was acting weird now, lagging behind and jumping coordinates. I stood still for a while, waiting for it to catch up, and that's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There were no birds,
No insects.
no wind, nothing, just silence. I don't know how long I stood there, listening. I turned slowly, trying to hear anything. A rustle of leaves, a crack of a branch, something. But it was dead silent. That kind of silence that's not peaceful, just unnatural. I kept moving slowly now, watching every step. My legs were cramping. I was sweating. And then, just as I reached a flatter area near the base of the slope, I stepped on something that wasn't dirt or rock. It was metal, a rusted canteen, almost buried in the ground. I dug around it and found what looked like an old torn pack buried under a few inches of leaves and dirt. The fabric was shredded by time and weather. It looked like it had been there for years. That's when fear started creeping in. Someone else had been out here, someone who didn't come back. I backed away from it, suddenly aware that I didn't know where I was. The GPS had no signal. The sky had darkened with clouds I hadn't noticed moving in. And the trail, whatever I thought was a trail, was gone. I was in the middle of the woods, surrounded by hills and thick trees, with no idea which way was back. I didn't panic, not yet. I found a small rocky outcrop and climbed up to see if I could get a view. All I saw was more forest in every direction. No clearings, no peaks, nothing man-made. Just trees. I checked my compass and tried to go west, back toward where I had come from. I kept checking my direction, hoping I'd recognize something, but everything looked the same. Trees, rocks, ferns, moss. The silence never lifted. It started raining lightly around 4 p.m., just enough to make everything slippery. My boots sank into the soft earth. I stumbled several times. At one point, I slipped down a muddy incline and landed hard on my side, scraping my arm on a rock. I just lay there for a few minutes, staring up at the gray sky through the trees, rain falling on my face. That's when the panic finally hit. I yelled, even though I knew no one could hear me. I shouted until my voice cracked, but the forest just swallowed the sound. There was no echo, no reply, no hint of anything human. I was completely alone. I forced myself to move. I had to find shelter. I couldn't set up my tent on that slope, so I dragged myself back uphill until I found a small ledge under an overhanging rock. I was soaked, cold, shaking, and everything hurt. I set up the tent half in the open, half under the rock. I didn't even eat. I just crawled into my sleeping bag and listened to the rain and my heartbeat in my ears. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I kept hearing things. Twigs breaking, leaves rustling. I told myself it was animals, maybe deer or raccoons, but I didn't believe it. Once, I heard something that sounded like footsteps, not fast or close, just steady. Then silence again. The next morning, my GPS still didn't work. I turned it off and on. Nothing. I tried the satellite communicator. No signal. I don't know if the thick clouds were blocking it or if I was in too deep, but it was useless. I sat there for a long time trying to figure out what to do. My food was running low. I had one full water bottle and a filter, but no idea where the next stream was. I started moving again. I picked a direction west and just walked. I marked trees with my knife every few hundred feet to track where I had been. I did that for hours. No trails, no people, no signs of anything. Around midday, I found another piece of gear. A torn shirt tangled in a bush, sun-bleached and brittle. No name tag, no ID. Just another reminder that I wasn't the first to get lost out there. That afternoon, I started hallucinating. I thought I saw a cabin in the distance, just a flash between trees. But when I got there, it was just rock and moss. I saw a person once, too, just standing between trees. I called out. No one answered. They were never there. I was dehydrated, hungry, and losing it. My leg I started the hike early in the morning, around 6:30 a.m. The air was cool, with the kind of stillness you only get in the deep parts of the forest before the world wakes up. I was about 2 hours north of the city, up near some old forestry land that hadn't been used in decades. I had read about a few old service trails up there from a forgotten blog post, the kind people write and then abandon. It mentioned that the trails were overgrown, mostly unused, and probably not even considered legal anymore. But that was exactly what drew me in. I packed light, just a small day pack with the basics: water, trail mix, a knife, a first aid kit, a windbreaker, and a printed map I had found online, just in case the GPS failed. My phone was fully charged, but I didn't expect to have signal in the deep woods. I parked at the end of a gravel road that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. The last few hundred meters were full of potholes, and the bushes were almost swallowing the trailhead. That was the first sign I ignored. I locked the car, slung my bag over my shoulder, and started the hike. First, it was beautiful. Birds chirping, sunlight dripping through the tall pine trees, the crunch of dry twigs and old needles beneath my boots. I followed the trail, such as it was, down into a small valley, then up the other side. The trail was narrow and overgrown, but still walkable. After about 45 minutes, I came to an old fire road. It was wide, with deep ruts and old tire marks barely visible in the dirt. There were faded signs of machinery, maybe decades old. That's where I made my mistake. The blog post had said that this old road led deeper into the hills and eventually looped back toward a creek that ran parallel to the access point I came from. It looked straightforward enough. I figured I had a good 6 or 7 hours of daylight left, and I wanted to explore somewhere less traveled. So I turned onto the old fire road and walked deeper into the forest. The trees got taller, denser. The sun struggled to break through. There were no more trail markers, no footprints, no trash. It was like stepping into another time. I liked that at first. It felt like I was discovering something no one else had seen in years. But the farther I walked, the less sure I felt. About an hour in, I stopped for water. That's when I first noticed something that bothered me. There were no sounds. Not birds, not squirrels. Nothing. Just the faint whistle of wind high in the trees. That stillness that had felt peaceful earlier now felt heavy, like the forest was holding its breath. I told myself I was overthinking it and kept going. The fire road curved down into a gully. I had to watch my footing because the slope was steep, and loose rocks kept sliding under my boots. Once I reached the bottom, the trail crossed what looked like a dry creek bed. The rocks were mossy and slick, and I had to slow down to keep from falling. On the other side, the trail narrowed again. The trees leaned in tighter, their branches clawing at the sky. I walked for another 30 minutes before I realized I didn't really know where I was. The map I had printed was basic, just lines and estimates, not real topography or coordinates. I tried using the GPS on my phone. No signal, not even a bar. The little blue dot was frozen on the screen, miles from where I knew I was standing. I tried restarting it. Nothing changed. That's when I thought maybe I should turn around. But when I looked back, the trail didn't look familiar. I couldn't even tell where the path I had just walked had been. The undergrowth was thick, and the shadows looked the same in every direction. I walked back the way I thought I had come, trying to retrace my steps. I walked for 20 minutes and found myself standing in the same dry creek bed again. That's when I felt real panic. I forced myself to sit down, take a deep breath, and eat some trail mix. I drank a little water and tried to think logically. I couldn't be that far from the car. I had only been hiking for a couple of hours. Worst case, I could keep walking downhill and eventually hit the gravel road or the creek. Water would lead to people. I just had to stay calm. I decided to keep following the fire road. It had to go somewhere. These roads weren't made to go in circles. I walked for another hour. The trail climbed sharply, switchbacking up a steep ridge. The sun was higher now, but I could hardly see it. My legs burned, and I was sweating through my shirt. I kept telling myself that over the ridge, there'd be a clearing or a sign or something. But when I reached the top, all I saw were more trees. The road flattened out, and I found an old rusted metal barrel half buried in the dirt. A piece of it had broken off and the inside was black like it had once been used for burning. I looked around and saw scraps of trash. A torn tarp, an old shoe, a crushed tin can. Maybe someone had camped there once. Maybe not recently. I kept walking. Eventually, I saw something through the trees. A flash of silver. I moved closer and found an old truck, half sunken into the ground, covered in pine needles. Its windows were shattered, and one of the tires was missing. The back had been torn open, and there were claw marks, deep ones, along the door. At first, I thought it was vandalized, but then I looked closer. The marks weren't from a knife. They were deep and wide, uneven like they'd been made by something with claws. I tried not to think about it. I moved on fast. The trail got narrower and darker. The trees were so thick overhead that I couldn't even see the sky. It felt like I was walking through a tunnel. The ground was soft, almost spongy. I started to smell something like wet fur and rot. I stopped and looked around. Nothing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I paused to listen, I thought I heard something behind me. A crunch, a snap, a shift in the wind. I would turn quickly, but the forest always looked the same. Still, empty, but the feeling wouldn't go away. I started walking faster. Then I tripped. My foot caught on something, and I went down hard, scraping my hands on the ground. I sat up and looked back. It was a wire, thin, rusty, stretched low across the trail. I hadn't seen it at all. Someone had put it there, deliberately. My stomach turned cold. I scanned the woods, heart pounding. Why would someone do that out here? Who else was even here? I didn't see anyone, but the forest didn't feel empty anymore. I got up slowly and kept moving. Every muscle in my body was tense. I was listening for everything now. The wind, the creaks in the trees, the rustle of leaves. And then I saw something that made me stop completely. Ahead of me, just barely off the trail, there was a tent. It was old, faded, half collapsed. One side had caved in and the fabric was torn. I stood there, not sure what to do. Then I noticed the ground around it was disturbed, like something had been dragged. The dirt was scraped, messy, with faint lines that led off into the woods. I didn't go any closer. I turned and ran. I didn't care which direction I was going anymore. I just needed to get out. I ran for maybe 20 minutes, my breath ragged, my legs aching, before I stopped. I leaned against a tree, dizzy and shaking. I felt like I was going to throw up. My chest hurt. I listened. Nothing. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Not mine. Not animals. Real footsteps. Slow. Heavy. I didn't look. I just moved. Quiet now. I crouched low and crept through the underbrush, staying off the trail. I moved in zigzags, trying not to snap branches. I didn't know where I was going. I just kept moving. Eventually, I saw sunlight through the trees. I pushed through the brush and came out onto a clearing. At the far end was a slope, steep but walkable, and beyond that, I saw a glint of water, the creek. I almost cried. I slid down the slope, grabbing onto roots and rocks to keep from falling. I reached the bottom and knelt by the water, cupping it in my hands and splashing it on my face. I followed the creek downstream. I didn't know how far it went or where it would lead, but I stayed close. I kept checking behind me, always checking. After an hour or more, I saw something that made me stop. A boot. It was lying on the bank of the creek, half in the water. Old, torn. A foot was still in it. I backed away, eyes wide. I didn't look for more. I didn't want to see anything else. I just kept walking. Sometime in the late afternoon, I heard a sound that nearly made me collapse. An engine. I ran toward it, crashing through the brush like a madman. I burst onto a gravel road just as a ranger's truck was passing. I waved my arms, and he hit the brakes. I couldn't explain anything at first. I just pointed back into the woods and collapsed on the ground. They found my car the next day. I had hiked more than 10 miles from where I started. They went back with search dogs, but the tent was gone. The boot was gone. The wire was gone. Everything was gone. They told me I probably got turned around and imagined some of it. But I didn't imagine that smell. I didn't imagine that wide. I started the hike early that morning. The sky was still gray, the air cool and dry. I remember the way the forest looked while the sun was still behind the hills. Quiet and calm, not threatening in any way. I parked my car on a small dirt patch just off a back road, deep in a national forest I hadn't explored before. I had read online that the place had some hidden waterfalls and old forest logging roads that weren't marked on regular maps. That was what I liked. Places that were off the beaten path. I had packed enough for 2 days. A small tent, food that didn't need cooking, water filter, first aid, flashlight, knife, extra clothes, and a basic map. I had GPS on my phone too, but I knew the signal would probably go out once I got deep into the forest. I wasn't scared of being alone. I had done plenty of solo hikes before, even in worse conditions. I was used to sleeping under the stars and hearing things at night that most people would lose their minds over. I didn't scare easy. That's what I used to think. Anyway, the first few hours were fine. The trail I started on was faint but still visible. It wound around the base of a hill, followed a creek for a while, and then went deeper into thicker woods. I passed old tree stumps, some with metal bolts still stuck in them from logging equipment decades ago. Felt like I was walking into the past. The farther I went, the less human the forest felt. No signs of litter, no footprints, nothing but trees, moss, and silence. I liked it that way. I reached a ridge around noon and stopped for lunch. I remember sitting on a flat rock, legs dangling over the side, and eating peanut butter straight out of the jar with a plastic spoon. Below me was a wide stretch of forest that seemed to go on forever. There was no movement, not even birds. That should have struck me as odd. I didn't think much of it at the time. After lunch, I continued on. That's when the trail started to fade. It didn't end suddenly, just got harder and harder to follow. I'd see a faint patch of dirt 1 minute, then nothing but leaves and dead branches the next. I used the position of the sun and my compass to keep my direction steady. I wasn't worried. I had marked my entry point on my GPS before the signal dropped. I figured I could always backtrack. That's what I thought. But sometime around 3 p.m., I realized I wasn't sure where the trail had gone. I'd been pushing through brush and thick undergrowth, assuming it would reappear, but it didn't. I stopped and looked around. Everything looked the same: tree trunks, leaves, rocks, patches of fern. No markers, no signs of a path. I turned around and walked back the way I came. Or at least I thought I did. After 20 minutes, nothing looked familiar. I checked my GPS again, but the screen just showed a gray grid with no location. Still, I wasn't panicking. I had plenty of daylight left, I had gear, and I knew enough about basic navigation. I kept calm and headed in the general direction I believed would take me back to the ridge. I thought if I could just get back to that flat rock where I ate lunch, I'd find the trail again. But I never found it. The terrain started to change. More fallen trees, gullies, and slopes that didn't match anything I'd seen earlier. By the time the sun dipped behind the trees, I had to accept that I was lost. That wasn't the worst part. Getting lost is always a risk. The real fear came later. I found a flat patch of ground between 2 large boulders and decided to set up my tent there for the night. I ate a granola bar and drank from my water bottle. I still felt okay. I figured in the morning, I'd head east, find higher ground, maybe spot the road or the creek from there. That night, I barely slept. Not because of fear, but because the forest felt different. I kept waking up, thinking I heard branches snapping or leaves rustling too close to the tent. But when I'd sit up and hold my breath, everything would go still again. I told myself it was raccoons or deer. Still, I held my knife in my hand while I laid there in the dark. In the morning, the first thing I noticed was a mark in the dirt just a few feet from my tent. A boot print, not mine. I checked. Mine had deep, square-pattern treads. This one was smoother, rounder, and smaller. I crouched beside it and looked closely. It was fresh. No leaves had fallen into it. The edges were still sharp. Someone had walked near my tent during the night. I stood up and scanned the forest. I didn't see anyone. No movement. No sound. Just that heavy silence again. A silence that now felt full of something I couldn't see. I packed up quickly. I didn't eat. I just threw everything into my pack and started moving, east toward higher ground. I didn't run, but I moved fast. I kept checking behind me. Every few minutes, I'd stop and listen. Nothing. But the feeling didn't go away. That feeling of being watched. Around noon, I found a small stream and followed it uphill. It was slow going. The ground was soft and uneven. Several times I slipped and had to catch myself on roots or rocks. My legs were getting tired. My mouth was dry. I filtered some water and drank while crouched by the stream, constantly looking around. That's when I saw it. Another boot print. This one was in the mud near the water's edge. It was the same shape as the one near my tent. I stared at it for a long time. Then I noticed something else. A broken branch about chest high, with a fresh white splinter exposed. Someone had walked here recently. Someone was moving in the same direction I was, or following me. I felt a wave of cold go through my body, even though it was warm out. I got up and kept moving, this time slower, quieter. I started avoiding open areas. I moved through bushes behind trees. I tried to leave less of a trail. By evening, I found a cave, more like a hollow under a large rock outcrop. I didn't want to sleep in the open again. I climbed in and pulled branches over the entrance. I didn't cook, didn't light anything, just lay there in the dark with my pack against my chest and the knife in my hand. That night, I heard something, not far off. Footsteps, not an animal. Steady, slow. I held my breath and didn't move. They stopped for a long time. I don't know how long I lay there, eyes open, heart pounding. I didn't sleep at all. In the morning, I came out slowly. I looked around the area for signs. Nothing. But a few minutes later, not far from the cave, I saw something that stopped me cold. Hanging from a low branch at my eye level was a piece of orange cloth, torn like from a shirt or jacket. It wasn't mine. I didn't wear orange. It looked like it had been tied there on purpose. I stared at it. I don't know why, but I didn't touch it. I just backed away. I started to walk again, faster this time, not caring about noise. I just wanted to get away from that spot. That was when I first thought maybe someone didn't want me to leave. Or maybe someone was playing a game. A bad one. All day I saw more signs. Twigs arranged in X shapes. Small stacks of rocks in unnatural piles. Once I saw a strip of duct tape on a tree trunk, smooth and new. Who the hell was out here? And why were they marking things? That evening I found an old logging road. Overgrown, but still recognizable. I almost cried when I saw it. I followed it for a long time, hoping it would lead to something. Cabin, a road, anything. But around dusk, I saw movement ahead. I ducked into the brush and watched. A figure was walking down the road. Too far to see clearly, but definitely a person. Alone, moving slow. I stayed hidden until they passed. They didn't see me. They weren't dressed like a ranger or hiker. They wore a long dark coat or something loose like that. I waited until they were gone, then moved the other direction. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I climbed a tree and sat on a wide branch, hoping being off the ground would help. Didn't. Every sound felt sharp, dangerous. I kept the knife open in my lap. At dawn, I followed the road again. After a few miles, it split into two. I picked the one that seemed to head downhill. It was rough, full of roots, barely usable. My feet were sore, legs aching, but I kept going. Midday, I saw a cabin. It was small, old, probably from the logging days. Windows were broken. The door was open, hanging crooked. I considered checking inside, maybe resting. But something told me no. I don't know what. I just kept walking. I was almost past it when I noticed something on the wall. Deep scratches. Not from claws or animals. These looked like they were carved on purpose. A triangle with a line through it. Below it, the number 3. It didn't mean anything to me, but I didn't like it. That afternoon, I heard the person again. Footsteps behind me, too far to see. But they were there. They'd stop when I stopped. They'd move when I moved. I didn't look back anymore. I just kept going. I walked until nightfall and didn't stop. No tent. No sleep. I just walked. My flashlight flickered a few times, so I stopped using it. I walked by moonlight, nearly falling several times. Once, I heard a branch. I had planned that hike for months. It was a solo trip, just me, my pack, and 4 days in the hills. The trail was one I had never done before, deep in a part of the national forest that most people didn't go to anymore. It wasn't one of those scenic, well-marked routes where people take selfies next to waterfalls. It was long, it was remote, and it had a reputation for being hard. That was part of why I picked it. I wanted to test myself. The area I was heading into was called Millstone Ridge, tucked away in the northern part of the state. It had a bad rep, but not because of anything spooky. It was just forgotten. Some parts were barely maintained, some not at all. Old forest roads cut through the edges of it, but the deeper parts where I was headed weren't even on most maps anymore. I had found the trail marked faintly on a digital topographic map and traced it out by cross-referencing old forestry documents online. It looked doable, if long and steep in sections. I parked at a gravel turnout just after dawn and locked the car. I checked my pack twice before I left the vehicle. Tent, food, stove, 3 liters of water, filtration kit, knife, first aid, extra socks, dry shirt, compass, backup battery for my phone, satellite beacon. I had thought of everything. The weather was warm but not hot. The air had that late summer smell, dry dirt, pine needles, dusty leaves. I started hiking at a good pace. The first couple of miles were easy, mostly flat, soft ground, lots of shade. No people, no sounds but the wind through the tall trees and the occasional bird call. It was the kind of silence that I enjoyed. Felt peaceful, clean. By the time I got to mile 6, the trail had narrowed into a rocky path that twisted up along the edge of a shallow gorge. There was a stream far below, and I could hear it, faint but steady. That was going to be my first refill spot. I had marked it on my notes. I dropped down a side path, filtered 2 fresh liters from the stream, and moved on. No issues so far. I set up camp just before the 12-mile mark that night. My legs were sore from the elevation gain, and my right foot had a small blister starting. I took care of it with moleskin and cleaned my socks in a little spring near the campsite. I cooked instant rice and tuna with some hot sauce, sat under a tree, and watched the sky darken through the branches. It got real quiet after sunset, like someone had flipped a switch. Even the birds seemed to stop calling. I lay down early and slept deep. The next morning was the first time something felt off. Started small. I couldn't find my trail mix bag. I was sure I had put it in the top compartment of my pack, but it wasn't there. I figured maybe I dropped it or forgot to pack it. Not a big deal, I had enough other food. I moved on. Around noon that day, I came to a junction in the trail where the terrain changed sharply. The trees thinned out, and the trail cut along a long, exposed ridge. You could see for miles. It was beautiful, but something about it made me uneasy. It wasn't just the drop-offs on either side. It was the wind, dry and hard, blowing west to east, constant. It carried this strange, faint smell, like old rust and wet dirt. The kind of smell that reminded me of an abandoned basement or a tool shed that hadn't been opened in years. I kept going. That part of the trail had no shade and no water, and I started to feel it. The sun was high and strong. I drank more than I should have. When I reached the next water point, I was down to less than half a liter. I filtered more from a shallow creek, took a break under a stunted pine tree, and stretched my calves. That's when I noticed the scratches on my arm. At first, I thought I had brushed against something thorny, but these were straight, thin, red, almost evenly spaced, like something had scraped across me. I tried to remember if I had squeezed through branches or anything rough. Nothing came to mind. I shrugged it off. Maybe I hadn't noticed. I put some ointment on it and kept moving. By evening, the trail had turned again, descending into a deeper, darker part of the forest. It was thicker here. The trees were closer together, the undergrowth dense, the air cooler. I had that feeling again, the wrong feeling. Not panic, just something tugging at me from the inside, like a knot in my gut. I didn't see any animals that day. No squirrels, no deer, no birds. Nothing moved in the trees. No sounds. It wasn't natural, that quiet. I tried to focus on the trail, which had started to fade. It was more overgrown than I expected. Sections were almost gone, hidden under moss and leaf litter. I had to stop often to check the map on my phone, using GPS to make sure I was still on course. My battery was okay, and I had the backup charger, but the fact that I had to rely on tech made me nervous. That night, I camped in a low area beside a muddy pond. It was the only flat spot I could find. The place smelled bad, like rot and algae, but I was tired. I ate fast, didn't even light a fire, and crawled into my tent. I lay awake for a long time, listening. There were sounds this time, snapping twigs, rustling brush, but they weren't animal sounds. They were slow, deliberate, like footsteps, always just far enough away that I couldn't be sure. I held my knife in my hand all night. The next morning, I was missing another item. My second backup protein bar was gone from the side pocket of my pack. It was zipped up the night before. I was sure of it. This wasn't wildlife. The bag was sealed, untouched, like someone had opened the zipper, removed the bar, and closed it again. That was the first time I thought about turning back. But I was more than halfway through. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was tired, dehydrated, jumpy. I had trained for this. I couldn't quit over some missing food. By noon, I knew I had made a mistake. The trail was gone. Literally, it just disappeared. 1 minute I was walking along a faint track between two ridges, and the next I was standing in a clearing with no exit. No blazes, no markers, nothing. Just tall grass, a few dead trees, and that smell again, stronger now. Rusht, wet earth, something sour like meat gone bad. I walked in circles for almost an hour trying to find the trail again. My GPS was jumping around, flickering between spots. I checked the satellite beacon. It still had signal, but I didn't want to press the SOS unless I had no choice. I found what looked like a deer path and followed it north, thinking it might reconnect with the trail. Instead, it led me to something else. I found a campsite, an old one, really old. There was a fire ring made of stones, overgrown with moss. A broken folding chair half sunk in the dirt. Bits of plastic tarp tangled in tree roots. I looked around carefully. No signs of people, no footprints. I knelt and touched the stones of the fire ring. They were cold and dry. No recent use. Whoever had been here was long gone. But there was something else, a boot. Half buried, toe up, faded green canvas. I pulled it free and checked the inside. Mold, a rat's nest, long abandoned. It had been there for years. I didn't like the feeling I got standing there, like the air itself was pressing in. I kept going. I didn't find the trail again that day. I climbed a rise and tried to get a signal, nothing. Not even a dot on the GPS map. The sky clouded over, and the light changed. Dim, flat. I set up camp in a narrow grove between two fallen logs. I was low on water again, and I hadn't eaten since morning. That night was the worst. I woke up to the sound of something touching my tent. Not an animal, not the wind. It was a hand. I felt the fabric press in, fingers, slow, downward, like someone was feeling their way along the outside. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. It lasted maybe 5 seconds. Then nothing. I lay there until morning, knife in hand, heart pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. When the sun came up, I packed everything in 10 minutes and started walking west, off trail. I had to bushwhack thick brush, thorns, uneven ground. I cut my way through branches and slipped twice on wet logs. By noon, I found a fire road, narrow, gravel-covered, rutted. But it was something. I followed it for hours. Every step felt like I was pulling myself out of something dark. I still hadn't seen another person. Not a single one. Just after sundown, I came around a bend and saw tire tracks. Fresh ones. A truck had passed here maybe the day before. I followed them. For miles later, I came to a hunting shack. Empty, unlocked, abandoned, but I used the roof for shelter that night. I didn't sleep. In the morning, I got a signal. Just enough to ping a message. My location. My battery was almost dead. I sat there in the dirt for 5 hours before the ranger found me. He said I was 28 miles off course. I didn't tell him what really happened. I just said I got lost. He offered me a bottle of water and a ride back to the main station. I don't usually talk about what happened, not because I'm scared of people not believing me or anything like that, but because I hate reliving it. Every time I start thinking about it, I can feel the same cold sweat on the back of my neck. My stomach turns the same way it did that day, and the tightness in my chest comes back like it never left. But lately, I've been waking up in the middle of the night, hearing that silence again. That deep, dry silence that you only hear when you're truly alone in the woods. I figured maybe writing it down would help. It started as a simple hiking trip, something I'd done 100 times before. I'd been doing weekend hikes for years, sometimes day hikes, sometimes overnights. This time I picked a spot I hadn't done before, just to switch things up. It was in a state forest about 4 hours from where I lived. A big place, not very touristy, with lots of off-the-grid trails, which I usually liked. I don't like crowds. I like the quiet, the kind where you can hear the crunch of your own boots and your own breathing and not much else. That's what I go out there for. I left early in the morning, around 5:30 a.m., packed everything I needed the night before. Protein bars, some freeze-dried meals, lots of water, first aid kit, flashlight, extra batteries, knife, rope, lighter, sleeping bag, tarp, and some basic gear. I wasn't planning to camp overnight unless I really felt like it. It was one of those plans where I'd see how I felt after the first leg of the hike and decide if I wanted to keep going or come back. The trail I started on was called Copper Ridge Trail. It was supposed to be about 13 miles total if you stayed on it the whole way. The map at the trailhead showed some connecting trails that could shorten or extend it depending on which turn you took. I figured I'd go in about 6 or 7 miles, stop at the ridge overlook for a rest, then decide if I wanted to make a loop or turn back. The first few hours were uneventful. The trail was quiet. The weather was good, cool air, mostly cloudy skies, slight breeze. I passed one other hiker heading out early on, but after that, I was alone. The forest was thick in places but not dense enough to block out all the light. The trail itself was narrow and a bit rocky, with some gradual elevation gain as it climbed toward the ridge. I was in a good rhythm, walking steady, sipping water now and then, stopping to look at a deer track or a bird. It was the kind of peaceful I liked. My legs felt strong, my back wasn't aching yet, and I wasn't tired. Around noon, I reached the ridge overlook. It wasn't anything dramatic, just a flat spot with a break in the trees where you could see out across the forest for a few miles. Felt good to take the pack off and sit down. I ate some jerky and a granola bar, drank more water, and laid back against a rock. I probably sat there longer than I realized, because when I looked at my watch, it was after 1:30. I stood up, stretched my back, and checked my map again. I noticed there was an old connector trail that cut across a ravine and rejoined Copper Ridge farther down. It would shave off a few miles and get me back to the trailhead faster. The map didn't say much about it, and I remember seeing a faded sign for it earlier but hadn't paid attention. I figured if I took it, I could be back at my car by late afternoon instead of early evening. That sounded good, especially since the clouds were getting thicker and the breeze felt colder. So I made the decision to take the shortcut. That was my mistake. The first few 100 yards weren't bad. The trail was narrower and looked less traveled, but it was still visible. It led down into a shallow ravine that sloped gradually at first. The ground was covered in dry leaves, and the trees grew close together. I had to step over some fallen logs and duck under a few branches, but nothing unusual. I kept checking the map every 10 or 15 minutes just to make sure I wasn't drifting too far off. It seemed fine, but then the trail started fading. It didn't just disappear all at once. It just slowly turned into a kind of game trail, then just forest floor. I stopped a few times to see if I could pick it up again, looking for old markers, broken branches, boot prints, anything. I thought maybe it was just covered in leaves. I kept walking, thinking I'd pick it up again farther down. But I didn't. I kept telling myself it was fine, that the ridge was behind me, and I was headed mostly downhill, so as long as I kept going in that direction, I'd run into the main trail again eventually. I wasn't panicking yet, I'd gone off trail before. I had a compass, I had the map, and I had daylight. But what I didn't realize was how fast the terrain would change in that ravine. The slope got steeper, and the ground turned muddy in places. I slid a few times, caught myself on trees. At one point, I had to cross a little stream, and on the other side, I saw what looked like a trail again. It gave me a boost of confidence. I followed it for maybe 20 minutes before it just vanished again, this time completely. The trees were thicker here,
Taller.
and the light was dimmer. I stopped to check the map again and realized I had no idea exactly where I was. I wasn't sure how far I'd gone down the ravine or if I drifted left or right. I pulled out the compass and tried to reorient myself. I guess the main trail was to the north-northwest, so I started heading that way. But the slope kept curving. I felt like I was walking in circles. Every tree started looking like the last. That's when I felt the first real chill. It wasn't just the cold air. It was the feeling that something had shifted. The quiet had changed. The forest was always quiet, but now it was too quiet. No birds, no wind, just the sound of my own footsteps and the occasional crack of a stick. I kept walking, but now I was second-guessing every step. I checked the compass again and again. It was pointing the same way, but the terrain didn't match anything on the map. I came across a small outcropping of rock and climbed up a bit, hoping to get a better view, but all I could see were more trees. I didn't realize how deep the ravine was until then. The walls weren't cliffs, but they were steep enough that getting out wasn't going to be easy. I looked at my watch. It was 4:15 p.m. Still enough daylight, but not a lot. I started walking faster. I should have stopped and set up camp, waited for morning, but I didn't want to admit I was lost. I didn't want to spend the night in that ravine. Something felt wrong. Every sound I made echoed in a strange way. I started thinking I heard something behind me, like leaves crunching a second after I stepped. I turn and see nothing, just the trees. Then I came across the backpack. It was lying off to the side of a boulder, half covered in dirt and leaves. At first, I thought someone had left it behind, but when I looked closer, it was torn. The straps were ripped, and the back panel was shredded. I couldn't tell how long it had been there, but it didn't look old enough to be abandoned for years. There was mold on part of it, but the fabric was still strong. It wasn't sun-bleached. I didn't open it. I don't know why. I just felt this instinct not to touch it. That's when I knew I had to get out of there. I turned and started climbing uphill, not caring about the compass anymore. I just wanted higher ground. My legs were burning and I slipped more than once. I scraped my hands, ripped my sleeve on a branch. I wasn't thinking clearly. I was sweating even though the air was cold. I kept going up, pulling myself with my hands when I had to. Eventually, I made it to a flat spot where the slope leveled off. I dropped to the ground and caught my breath. It was getting dark now. The light was almost gone, and the sky was that deep gray that comes right before night. I pulled out my flashlight and turned it on. The beam was weak. I had spare batteries, but my hands were shaking too much to change them yet. I started walking again, slower now, scanning the trees. That's when I saw the tree. It was a tall, dead pine, gray and stripped of bark. At its base, someone had carved a mark into the trunk. A symbol, maybe, a wide circle with a vertical line through it. It wasn't fresh, but it wasn't old either. The bark around it had fallen away clean. I didn't know what it meant, but it stopped me in my tracks. I took a few steps back and looked around. Then I heard it. Not a sound, not a voice, just a thud. A single, solid thud, like something heavy hitting the ground. Then nothing. I froze. My light was pointed at the trees, but nothing moved. No wind, no animals. I slowly backed away, scanning side to side. Then I turned and walked as fast as I could without running. I didn't want to run. I felt like if I ran, something would follow. For the next hour, I just moved. No direction, no plan, just away. I stumbled, fell once, cut my knee on a rock. I wrapped it with a bandana and kept going. I was limping now, but I didn't stop. Not until I saw the trail marker. It was an old wooden post with a red reflector on top. Part of the original trail system. It had a number carved into it. 7. I checked the map and saw it marked as a point on the main Copper Ridge Trail. I almost cried. I turned left and followed the trail, limping but steady. I didn't reach my car until almost 10 p.m. My legs were trembling, my back was soaked with sweat, and my hands were scraped raw. I collapsed into the driver's seat and locked the doors without thinking. I sat there